Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So in my previous Stephen King video, I talked about my favorite Stephen King short books and tried to recommend y'all shorter Stephen King books because I know a lot of y'all complain that Stephen King writes massive tomes and that you don't have a lot of time to read long Stephen King books. So I wanted to make a video where I succinctly talked about a lot of his best short books. But for today's video, I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm talking about his long books. And there will be a lot of omissions from this video, in particular because a lot of his longer books I think are overrated. I will talk about some of the ones that I think are overrated, but I know in the massive Stephen King fandom, they're beloved. So I will, of course, mention them. Just know that a couple of these books are not going to be my favorite. But he does have a lot of great long books that if you're in the mood for a tome or a book that's going to take you probably more than a few days to read, maybe like a week or two, stay tuned because I'm going to be talking about a lot of his best long books. So enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So like I said, I'm going to mention a few off the top here that I know a lot of Stephen King fans love, but I'm not a huge fan of. But of course, what do I know? But I'm going to, of course, mention The Stand. You can't make a video like this without talking about The Stand because it is a literal brick of a book. Now, I do think it is his most overrated book. Calm down. But there are certain elements that I do love about this book. It has great characters, and part one of this 3-part epic is actually really good. The first time I read this, I read part one, and I was convinced that this was going to be my favorite Stephen King book ever. It was that good. Part one deals a little bit more on the horror and apocalypse side of things, and it was really good, really scary. I really liked it. And then part two happened, where it was a boring mess for me. Still great characters, but just not on the same level as the beginning of the story. And then part three has a controversial ending. Some people love it, some people hate it. But overall, it was worth the read. I just don't think it's his best long book. A lot of people are going to disagree with me, but of course, I have to mention it here. I can't make a video like this without mentioning it, so there you go, The Stand. Along those same lines as a long Stephen King book that everyone seems to love, but I think is slightly overrated, or a lot overrated, would be 11/22/63. I really don't know a lot of people that hate this book or that dislike it as much as I do. I don't hate this book by any means. I just don't think I agree with everyone who thinks it's a top 10 Stephen King book, or it's like someone's favorite book. It will never be in my top 10, but it is good. And especially the first, I'd say like third, maybe like first 300 pages of this are excellent. And of course, if you don't know, the premise is that, what if you could go back in time and prevent the JFK assassination? And that's what it starts out as being. And when it does follow that, it's really good and really compelling. The problem is for me is that a lot of this middle stuff, it doesn't seem like filler, but a lot of it just seems like it could have been left out of the story, and I would have been fine with it. I would have been fine with this cut in half and just him sticking strictly to the premise. I would have really loved that. But of course, the reason why people love this is everything, and including the romance that happens between a character, and the ending people love, and people just love this book in general. So of course I have to at least mention it, even though it is not one of my favorites, but I do recommend you trying it. So that would be 11/22/63. So this next book isn't as huge as those two books, and it's certainly not as huge as some of the books I have left to talk about, but it is a chunker, so I figured I'd mention it here at least. And that would be Desperation by Stephen King, of course. I don't have to keep mentioning that. But yeah, it's a pretty good chunker. It's like almost 700 pages, my edition. And I've read this book twice now. And in fact, I did a review for it for my Patreon. So I will leave that down below if you want to go check that out. Yeah, it's really good. It's really bonkers. It's got a very unique setting for Stephen King. A lot of his books take place in like a colder climate, but this takes place, I believe, in Nevada in a desert. So very interesting setting, very creepy atmosphere, a lot of good, memorable characters. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, I'd say it's really good. I give it 4 stars, and I probably am blanking on what to say because I've already done my review for it. So if you want to hear my more broader thoughts and more specific thoughts, go check out my book review. But for right now, just know that it's actually a really good, chunky Stephen King book. Now, this next book isn't the longest Stephen King book, but my edition makes it look like it is, and that would be Under the Dome, a massive tome. This edition clocks in at around 1,050 pages, but it is a little deceitful because the font is fairly big, so it's not nearly as long as like The Stand or 11/22/63 or another book that I have to talk about later on in the video. But it is still a chunker. Under the Dome, really good except for the very ending. One of the worst Stephen King endings ever, if not the worst in my mind, which is super crappy because the rest of this book is really good in my opinion. Like the first 900 pages, the premise is really good. Like you got a town, that's stuck under this dome. They have no idea why. They have no idea what to do. And it's basically following their lives after that. And it's really good and really gripping. But then the ending sucks. So, man, sometimes Stephen King does have crappy endings. Not all the time, but sometimes. And this is a clear case. But yeah, like I said, the first 900 pages are really good. They're really good. And then the ending is not the best. But it is one of the better, chunkier Stephen King books because sometimes with his chunky books, sort of like Dreamcatcher and the Tommyknockers, which are not on this list, of course, those tend to have good starts, but then the middle chunk of the book is just really bad, in my opinion. Whereas this one, it's good throughout. Like 90% of the book is great. It's just the very ending that sucks. So if you want, that experience, go read Under the Dome. And of course, the book that y'all have probably been waiting for me to talk about in this video is It. Now, again, I do think it's overrated. I don't think it would ever be in my top 10. But of course, a lot of people love this book. And it is indeed chunky. It's like 1,100 pages. Yeah, so for me, this book is great because of its characters, and it's just some of the best character work that Stephen King has ever done. But in my mind, the pacing is super slow, and it should have been edited down a little bit. Like, my edition is 1,100 pages. I think it would have been even better if it was like 800 or 900 pages. And it's not even that the scenes themselves are unnecessary. It's just that they go on too long. So the pacing just feels kind of wonky. Like I said, great characters, and the stuff that happens in this book when stuff does happen is very good. But for me, the scenes can sometimes be stretched out too long, and they needed to be edited down, in my opinion. But of course, a lot of people disagree with me and say that it's a masterpiece and nothing should be changed. So take that for what you will. But of course, I had to include it on this list. I do think it's overrated, but it is still a great book in my mind. So of course, I had to include it. One of my favorite chunky Stephen King books is one that I'm hoping to reread pretty soon. And that would, of course, be Needful Things. I love this book. And it's an old paperback copy that clocks in at around 730 pages with small font. So it is quite a lengthy book, and it's really good. And like I said, there are a lot of longer Stephen King books that have a lot of pacing issues, and this one does not have any. I think it's paced very well. It has great character work, and you get to the end of the book, and it's just chaos and madness, and it's bonkers, and I love it. And like I said, I really want to reread it soon. And yeah, there's so much to love about this book. And it just goes to show you that while I do think King is better at writing shorter books, he is capable of writing a really good, well paced, long book. And he doesn't always do it, but when he does, it's really good. So if you haven't checked out Needful Things, I'd highly recommend it. Now we're coming to a long Stephen King book that not only do I love, but I would possibly put it in my top 5 Stephen King books. Definitely my top 10, but possibly top 5. I love this book. I've done a review for it that I'll link down below. And enough beating around the bush. I'm, of course, talking about Key. I love this book, and it is quite lengthy. It clocks in at almost 800 pages, so it's a chunker. It's not like, It or The Stand or anything, but it does take some time to read. And despite its length, I think it's very good. I think it's very well paced. One of, if not my favorite Stephen King protagonist in Edgar Freemantle. Also one of, if not my favorite friendship that Stephen King has ever written with Edgar Freemantle and Wireman. Love their combination and I love their friendship. There's just so much to love about this book. And of course, I go into much more detail about it in my Doomickey book review. That's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, if you want my thoughts, go check out the book review. Just know that this is probably my favorite Stephen King book that's over 700 pages or so. It's very good. Highly recommended, of course, if you haven't read it yet. So go check out Doomickey, one of his best, if not his best, long book. And of course, when you're talking about Stephen King's long books, you can't forget to talk about the Dark Tower series. Not all of his books in the Dark Tower series are long. You got The Gunslinger, which is like less than 300 pages. Drawing of the Three, 400 pages. But then you get to The Wastelands, which is a pretty good chunker. It's like 600 pages. Takes a little bit to get into. And for me, it's my second favorite Dark Tower book. It's a lot of people's favorites for good reason. I really enjoy it. And then you get to Wizard and Glass. Very, very chunky book. For me, it's not perfect. Like, there are some parts in the middle that go on maybe a bit too long. But still, I love this book. One of my favorite Dark Tower books. And then, of course, you get to the Behemoth, which is the last book, The Dark Tower. And again, not perfect. I think I would give this 4 stars. There's some kind of not great stuff about this book. Towards the end and like the middle, there's some weird stuff that I don't love. But of course, there's some really standout moments. And the very ending is worth it in my mind. One of the best Stephen King endings ever. One of the best fantasy series endings ever. It's really good. So yeah, and of course, I'm not mentioning... Well, I guess I can mention it here, but Wolves of the Kala, probably my least favorite Dark Tower novel besides maybe like Went Through the Keyhole. But it is still good. It's like a 3-star book, and it is chunky, so I'll just give it like a side glance here. Wolves of the Kala. But yeah, those are all of the long Stephen King books that I will mention for this video. Please let me know if you agree with me or you disagree with me. Are there any Stephen King long books that I didn't mention here that are some of your favorites? Just leave down your favorite long Stephen King books in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you about it. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookerstormer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me financially, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching and have a terrific day.